You've got until Friday to take it down, or we'll start the lien process. Patty Wexler's voice carried across my driveway like she owned the air itself. Her manicured hand gestured at the pergola in my backyard, the one draped with my father's folded American flag and the wind chimes Lena hung when I left for deployment. She didn't even flinch when my wife's face went pale. Rules are rules, unauthorized structure. Your little memorial can't stay. I stepped forward, duffel still slung over my shoulder. Funny thing about rules, I said, letting my voice settle low and steady. They work both ways. For the first time, she blinked. I'd spent 9 months in sand and steel across the world, but this cul-de-sac had a war of its own. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I'm Ethan Cole, Staff Sergeant in the U.S. Army Reserve, structural engineer by trade. People like Patty think guys like me come home to mow lawns and nod along. They don't know I can look at a property and see every hidden flaw, every corner they've cut, every time they think no one's watching. That pergola isn't just wooden nails. My dad built it before cancer took him, hands shaking as he pressed the last beam into place. Lena sat there every night I was overseas, listening to the wind chimes when she couldn't sleep. The HOA isn't asking me to take down a structure. They're asking me to erase the only piece of my father that still breathes in this backyard. Lena stood behind me, arms wrapped tight around herself. She didn't say a word, but I saw the story in her eyes. Months of threats, fines slapped on our door, the late-night inspections she told me about in trembling phone calls I couldn't answer from a desert half a world away. And now this woman had the nerve to corner her in broad daylight. Patty smirked, clearly mistaking my silence for compliance. You military types think the rules don't apply to you. Well, they do here. Her pearl bracelet jingled as she turned like she was already walking away victorious. Where are you watching from? I said it out loud, half to the neighbors peeking from behind their blinds, half to the invisible line I drew in my mind. Because this wasn't just about me. It never is with people like her. I knelt by the pergola, running my hand along the beam where my dad's initials were carved small and crooked, like he'd pressed his mark into the wood before letting go. The anger in my chest wasn't the kind that burned. It was the kind that calcified, heavy and certain. Patty Wexler had just declared a war she couldn't win, and she didn't even know it yet. She'd spent months intimidating my wife, counting on my absence to make us bend. But I wasn't gone anymore, and while she thought this was about a few HOA fines, I'd already spotted the first crack in her little empire from the corner of my eye. I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. The city inspectors I've worked with for years wouldn't take kindly to what I'd just noticed by the drainage swale near the mailbox cluster. But I smiled, the kind of calm, quiet smile that made Patty pause mid-step. This isn't over, I said simply, and in my head, the plan started to form. She wanted a fight over my father's memory. She was about to get one, but not the kind she expected. The morning after Patty's little driveway ambush, I sat at our kitchen table staring at a pile of letters that could have wallpapered the entire house. Every single one had the same letterhead. Lakewood Pines Homeowners Association, and every single one had Patty's signature scrawled across the bottom like a threat. Lena slid another envelope toward me with a tight jaw. This one came last week, she said, her voice low. I stopped opening them after a while. The envelope was already torn. Inside was a final warning demanding $750 in fines for unauthorized structure and failure to comply with HOA landscaping aesthetics. The picture attached was a zoomed-in shot of our pergola taken from the sidewalk, like someone had been skulking around in the dark. I pushed back my chair and looked at the stack again. Each letter was a different shade of intimidation, violation notices, friendly reminders, threats of legal action. I could almost see the progression of Patty's smugness over the months I was gone. You weren't exaggerating, I said, my fingers brushing the edges of one photo where my father's flag was flapping in the wind. She's been relentless. She comes by at night, Lena whispered. Her hands gripped her coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her steady. I hear footsteps in the driveway. Once I looked out and she was just standing there, taking pictures, and I couldn't even call you. The anger settled deeper this time. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that coils, patient and calculating. Patty Wexler didn't just want compliance, she wanted domination. I spent the day walking the street just to see what the neighbors were living with. It didn't take long to realize we weren't the only ones under her thumb. 2 houses down, old Mr. Hughes was kneeling in his yard, pulling up healthy rose bushes. His wife stood on the porch, arms folded. I stopped at the curb. "Everything okay?" I asked. He looked up with a tired shrug. "HOA says the blooms are the wrong color. They want uniform reds for community cohesion." He glanced toward the clubhouse like it was a watchtower. "I've lived here 20 years, son. Never seen it like this." Further along, I passed the Jeffersons' house, where a bright yellow notice was plastered on the garage. "Paint shade non-compliant," it said in bold. Their kid's bike leaned against the fence, tires flat. I noticed blinds twitching in 2 other houses. Folks were watching, but nobody was stepping out. I finally made my way to the cluster of mailboxes. A neighbor I didn't know lingered there, shuffling envelopes like she wasn't really reading them. Her eyes flicked up when I stopped. "You're the one with the pergola, right?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Yeah," I said. "She's been talking about you at the meetings, says you're a problem." I let the words settle. "And what do you think?" The woman hesitated, scanning the quiet street. "I think she's scared someone will finally call her bluff. She's fined half this block in the last 6 months." Then, softer, "I hope you do something." I walked home with the weight of it all pressing on my shoulders. This wasn't just about my pergola or my father's flag. Patty had turned this entire neighborhood into a place where people kept their heads down, afraid to live on their own property. As I stepped into the backyard, the wind caught the chimes on the pergola. The sound was soft, almost defiant. My father's initials were still carved into the beam, weathered but unshaken. Patty Wexler thought she was dealing with another quiet neighbor, someone who'd fold under the weight of fines and threats. She had no idea she'd turn this cul-de-sac into my battlefield. I pulled my phone from my pocket and snapped a photo of the memorial under the late afternoon light. Not for evidence, not yet. Just a promise to myself. This stays. I didn't have to wait long to meet the man whose quiet presence I'd felt since stepping back into this neighborhood. Martin Briggs, HOA treasurer, was fiddling with the locks on the community mailbox when I walked up with Lena's letters in hand. He was in his early 60s, soft shoulders curved forward, a man who seemed to apologize for existing. "Afternoon," I said. He jumped a little, dropping his keys. When he bent to grab them, I noticed his hands trembled. His gaze flicked toward my house, then over his shoulder at the street before he muttered, "You're Ethan, right? The pergola." "That's me." Martin's eyes darted back to the mailbox. I've seen the letters. Patty, she moves fast when she smells blood." His voice was a strained whisper, and every few seconds he glanced around like the hedges might have ears. I leaned against the post, letting the moment breathe. "She's been harassing my wife while I was overseas. I don't take kindly to that." Martin swallowed, lips tightening like he wanted to say more but couldn't. His shoulders hunched even further. "Look, I keep the books. That's all I do. I didn't vote on the fines. His words trailed off. His face said the rest, guilt mixed with fear. "You're on the board," I said gently. "But you're not on her side." He didn't answer. He stuffed a handful of mail into his satchel and fumbled with the keyring again. I could see the war inside him written in his posture, one foot wanting to step toward me, the other rooted in Patty's shadow. "Martin," I said quietly, "neighbors shouldn't be afraid to live in their own homes." His jaw twitched. A muscle in his cheek jumped. For a split second, his eyes met mine, full of something raw and unsettled, before he looked away. "Careful," he muttered. She keeps track of who talks to who." Then he walked off, fast and hunched, like my driveway was a battlefield, and he'd crossed a line just standing there. I watched him go, realizing he was my first threat inside the HOA's walls. He didn't know it yet, but every tremble in his hands, every stolen glance over his shoulder, told me he was one push away from breaking rank. Back home, Lena met me at the door with another envelope she'd pulled from the mail. "They're not slowing down," she said. Inside was a notice for a special hearing scheduled next week to determine ongoing non-compliance penalties. "They're trying to make an example of us," I said, setting it on the counter. "But they don't know I've already started watching them." From the backyard, The wind chimes sang softly. I walked out to the pergola and knelt by the beam with my father's initials. Every soft clang of metal against metal reminded me why this fight mattered. This wasn't just wood and rope. It was the last thing he built with his own hands. A memory flickered of our last conversation here, my dad's voice gravelly but certain. A man defends what's his, Ethan. Not out of pride, out of duty. I felt that duty now, settling into my bones. Across the street, a curtain fluttered. I caught a glimpse of Martin standing in his front window, half hidden. He raised a hand in a hesitant, almost guilty wave before disappearing behind the curtain. He was scared, sure, but fear had a way of curdling into courage when someone else stood up first. The neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for someone to break Patty's grip. I realized, standing under my father's pergola, that the first crack in her armor had already appeared, shaking hands, averted eyes, and a man who wanted to do the right thing but hadn't yet found the nerve. I was going to give him that chance. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood where someone like Patty thought they could control everything, drop a like and subscribe. This story's just getting started, and the next move I make might be the one that cracks her whole empire wide open. The next confrontation came faster than I expected. Lena was in the driveway unloading groceries when Patty Wexler strutted up with two other board members flanking her like loyal bodyguards. One of them held a clipboard. The other clutched a phone like he was recording evidence for a war crimes tribunal. "This is your final warning," Patty said, voice sharp enough to slice through. The quiet street. If that pergola isn't gone in 48 hours, the board will file for a lien against your property, and you can explain to your mortgage company why you ignored repeated notices. I stepped out from the garage before Lena could answer. "Bold move, threatening a military family in broad daylight," I said, my voice flat. The board member with the phone hesitated, lowering it an inch. Patty didn't. She tilted her chin up like a queen addressing a peasant. "Don't play the soldier card here. HOA rules are civilian law, and you're breaking them. That structure is unauthorized, and the board voted unanimously to enforce compliance." I watched Lena's fingers twitch against a grocery bag. She hated conflict, and Patty thrived on intimidation. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was theater, meant to scare every neighbor watching from their windows. "Unanimous?" I asked. My eyes drifted to Martin Briggs's house, across the street. His blinds barely moved, but I saw the shape of a man frozen behind them. My gut tightened. "Interesting. I'll remember that." Patty's lip curled. "You can remember it from the courthouse steps if you like. Maybe the judge will enjoy your little sentimental excuse for breaking the rules." I let her words hang there. The wind rustled the chimes on my father's pergola, and that soft metallic song calmed the heat in my chest. "Here's the thing," I said finally. "Every war I've been in, I've learned one rule. Don't fire the first shot unless you're ready for the last one." One of the board members shifted uneasily. Patty frowned but said nothing. I leaned on the garage frame, letting my tone drop low. "This is me being polite. You've already crossed the line with my wife. Do it again, and you'll wish this was just about a pergola." Silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Finally, Patty turned on her heel. 48 hours, she snapped, marching back to the sidewalk. Her entourage followed, the one with the phone sneaking one last glance at me, like he wasn't so sure they were the heroes of this story. When they were gone, Lena exhaled a shaky breath. "They're not going to stop, Ethan." "I know," I said, staring down the street where Patty disappeared. "Which means it's my turn to move." I walked the property line that evening, tracing the edges of our lot with careful eyes. Years of engineering work had trained me to see patterns other people missed: subtle slopes in the grass, irregular water flow paths, the way storm runoff carved tiny grooves in the dirt near the greenbelt. The HOA wanted to blame my pergola for every imagined problem, but I was starting to see the real weak spot in their fortress. 2 houses down, the Jeffersons' yard still had a faint water stain creeping along the fence line. A memory from the last rainstorm clicked into place. Standing water in places it shouldn't be, moving in, directions it couldn't naturally flow. And somewhere behind the manicured shrubs of the common area, I suspected there was an answer Patty would hate me for finding. I returned to the pergola just before sunset. Lena joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "You're scaring me a little," she admitted softly. "Good," I said, eyes on the swaying flag. "That means Patty should be terrified. Because this wasn't just about standing my ground anymore. It was about turning her own neighborhood into the battlefield she'd tried to create, and making sure she was the one who couldn't retreat. The storm rolled through 2 nights later, and I was outside before the last drops even dried. Water pooled along the street edges, trickling toward the common area like a quiet trail waiting to be followed. My boots sank into the damp grass as I traced the runoff path toward the greenbelt behind the houses. Every instinct from my engineering career told me something wasn't right. The slope of the lawns, the way the soil compacted in streaks, it all pointed to unnatural drainage. I followed the trail past the walking path, crouched near a cluster of hedges, and there it was. A length of white PVC pipe protruding from the earth, cutting across HOA property, ending in a shallow ditch that was half flooded. I crouched lower, pressing my fingers into the wet soil. Unpermitted and improperly installed, I muttered to myself. I could almost hear my city inspector buddy's voice in my head. This is a liability nightmare. Behind me, the soft crunch of gravel made me turn. It was Mr. Hughes from 2 houses down, his raincoat hood pulled tight. "Checking the damage?" he asked quietly, glancing around like someone might be watching. "Something like that," I said, stepping aside so he could see the exposed pipe. His brows shot up. "Well, I saw them trenching back here last fall. They said it was for beautification drainage. Thought it looked fishy, but nobody wanted to get on Patty's bad side." I nodded, feeling that slow surge of purpose settle in my chest. This wasn't just a code violation. This was Patty's ticking time bomb, waiting to explode the moment the city saw it. When I returned to the backyard, Lena was waiting under the pergola with a towel. "You're soaked," she said, handing it to me. "Please tell me you weren't just wandering in the rain like a maniac." I toweled off my hair and looked her straight in the eye. "I found it, the HOA's Achilles heel, illegal drainage." She blinked. "You're sure?" I smiled faintly. "I'm an engineer, remember? I don't guess, I measure, and I'm going to document everything." I spent the next hour photographing the area from multiple angles, capturing the pipe, the pooling water, and the slope that pushed runoff toward the Jefferson's fence line. I measured the distance to our property, snapped pictures of erosion around the pipe, and even recorded a short video of the water flow. As the sun set, I transferred everything to a secure folder on my laptop. Each image felt like a bullet loaded into a magazine I hadn't fired yet. This wasn't the moment to pull the trigger, but soon. Lena joined me at the desk, resting her chin on my shoulder. "So what happens now?" she asked softly. "Now?" I said, scrolling through the photos. "Now, we keep our heads down and let Patty think she's winning. Meanwhile, I'm building the case that ends her little reign for good." She hesitated, then whispered, "I hate that it's come to this. He built that pergola with his hands, Ethan. Your dad would—" Her voice cracked, and she swallowed the rest. I reached for her hand and gave it a squeeze. "Dad would tell me to defend what's ours, and this time, I have the tools to do it." Outside, the wind picked up, and the chimes on the pergola sang that same soft defiance. I felt the memory of my father in every note, calm and certain. Patty wanted a fight. She just handed me the weapon. I closed the laptop and stood. "The board thinks they're untouchable," I said quietly. "But they've been standing on rotten ground this whole time. I just found the crack." In my chest, the weight of months of harassment started to shift into something sharper, momentum. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about taking the first step toward winning. The storm passed, but its reminder stayed in the form of muddy tire tracks and waterlogged grass along the Jefferson's fence. By the next afternoon, Patty had found a way to twist nature into another accusation. I was in the backyard tightening the pergola's corner bracket when I heard the click of heels on pavement. "There!" Patty's voice cut through the air, high and sharp. "That standing water proves your little memorial is interfering with drainage. I've already documented it for the board." I turned slowly. She stood at the edge of my driveway, phone raised like a weapon. Beside her, the board's secretary, a wiry man named Carl, was snapping photos of the wet grass. My wife froze in the doorway, grocery bag in hand, eyes wide. "You're unbelievable," I said. "You blamed a rainstorm on a pergola. What's next, the wind?" Patty's smile was thin and cold. "City code is clear. Any structure that disrupts drainage or causes nuisance flooding is a violation. We'll see how sympathetic a judge feels when your neighbors start filing damage claims." Her words were meant to cut, but all they did was confirm what I already knew. She was trying to flip the narrative before anyone flipped it on her. I could practically feel the unpermitted pipe in the greenbelt pulsing like a live wire, waiting to take her down. "Get off my property," I said evenly. "You've made your point." Carl hesitated, but Patty turned on her heel, tossing back, 48 hours. Then we escalate. When they left, Lena exhaled shakily. "She's not even hiding it anymore. She wants to break us." I wiped my hands on my jeans and stared at the backyard. The chimes swayed in the soft breeze, a small, steady sound against the tension. "She already made the mistake," I said. "Now it's about timing." That night, I sat at my home office desk with my laptop glowing in the dark. I pulled up the photos I'd taken of the illegal drainage pipe, the runoff patterns, the erosion marks, and the pooling water by the Jefferson's fence. Each image was another nail in Patty's coffin, but I couldn't move yet. The trap wasn't ready. I drafted a timeline, starting with the first letter Lena received, each violation building toward today's confrontation. In another folder, I logged the neighbors who'd been hit with arbitrary fines: Mr. Hughes with his roses, the Jeffersons with their paint, the Millers with their mailbox. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a pattern of abuse that would look very different to city inspectors. Around 9, a soft knock on the front door pulled me from the glow of the screen. I opened it to find Martin Briggs standing there, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, like he expected Patty to materialize from the shadows. "She's losing it," he whispered. "I saw her print the lien paperwork today. She wants the board to sign by tomorrow." I stepped aside to let him in. He perched at the edge of the couch, wringing his hands. "Martin," I said carefully, "you know this is wrong. You've seen what she's done to this neighborhood." His gaze fell to the floor. I know, I didn't vote for the liens, but she runs the meetings. She says if I step out of line, she'll find a reason to fine me too." I leaned forward. "You want this to stop? Then you need to help me, quietly, just long enough to make sure the right people see what she's really been doing." He hesitated, then gave a single trembling nod. "What do you need?" "Time," I said, "and access. When I'm ready, you'll know." After he left, I stood in the backyard, letting the night air wash over me. The pergola loomed above me like a silent ally, its chimes whispering against the dark. Patty thought she could corner me with threats and paperwork, but she didn't know I'd already moved the fight to ground she couldn't control. The next strike wouldn't come from me, shouting in a driveway. It would come from the city itself, carrying the weight of law she thought only she could wield. If you've ever dealt with someone who thought they could twist the rules to bully you, hit that like button and subscribe. The next move I'm about to make will turn Patty's own game against her, and you won't want to miss it. The following evening, just as the streetlights flickered on, I heard a hesitant knock on the back door. Lena glanced at me, nervous, as I opened it to find Martin, Briggs standing there in a windbreaker, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His eyes darted to the street and back. "Can I come in?" he whispered. I stepped aside, and he slipped into the kitchen, shoulders hunched as if the ceiling might cave in. He clutched a folder to his chest, fingers trembling. "She's gone too far," Martin said, voice cracking. "Patty wants to file the lien first thing tomorrow. She even joked about making an example out of you in the newsletter." He hesitated, glancing at Lena, then slowly opened the folder. Inside were HOA maintenance logs and partial receipts. "Is this what I think it is?" I asked. He nodded. "Proof. The drainage work wasn't permitted. She used reserve funds without a proper vote, hired her cousin's landscaping crew, and signed off without inspection. If the city sees this, she's done." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the folder settle in my hands. This was the missing piece. My photos and video showed the illegal pipe, but these documents proved the HOA knew it wasn't up to code. "Martin," I said, "this is exactly what I need. Are you sure you're ready for this?" He stared at the floor, jaw tight. "I can't keep pretending I don't see what she's doing. She scares everyone, including me. But I watched her make your wife cry and He trailed off, shaking his head. "I can't stomach it anymore." Lena touched his arm gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. We moved to my home office. I spread the receipts and logs across the desk, alongside the photos I'd already taken. Together, they told the story. Illegal drainage, HOA overreach, financial misconduct. The trap was nearly complete. Martin lingered at the window, peeking through the blinds like a fugitive. "If she finds out I came here, she won't," I said firmly. "I'm not using your name. The city doesn't need it to act. They just need proof." He swallowed hard and gave a jerky nod. For the first time, I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes, like a man finally choosing a side. After he left, Lena leaned against the desk, watching me organize the evidence. "You really think this will work?" "It has to," I said. "By the time the city steps in, Patty won't have a move left to play." I glanced at the pergola through the window, the flag catching the faint glow of the porch light. My father's initials on that beam felt like a silent promise. I wouldn't let anyone tear it down, not by force, not by intimidation. I opened my laptop and created a secure folder labeled HOA evidence package. Photos, videos, storm footage, and now Martin's documents went inside. Each file was another step toward turning the tables on Patty Wexler. Before shutting down for the night, I stepped outside for a breath of cold air. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm breaks. Not the kind in the clouds, but the kind that rattles through a community when the truth finally lands. Patty thought she had control because everyone was afraid to speak, but Martin had crossed the line tonight, and with him came the first real fracture in her armor. I reached up and brushed my fingers over the wind chimes, letting the metal hum through the night. "She has no idea what's coming," I murmured. The next phase of the plan wasn't about waiting anymore. It was about action. Precise, undeniable, and backed by the same laws she thought she controlled. The next morning, I sat at my desk with coffee gone cold, staring at the mosaic of evidence spread across my screen. Photos of the illegal pipe, video of runoff streaming into the Jefferson's fence line, Martin's maintenance logs, and the receipts he'd risked everything to hand over. All of it was now neatly compiled into a package that could take Patty Wexler's empire apart. I opened a secure folder and labeled it Code Enforcement Submission, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline humming through my chest. I'd already made backups on 2 encrypted drives. Years as a structural engineer had drilled into me that documentation was everything. Facts didn't tremble when bullies did. The first call I made was to James Fulton, an old friend and city inspector I'd served with in the reserve. His voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Cole, haven't heard from you since Kuwait. What's going on?" "Got a neighborhood problem," I said, leaning back in my chair. "HOA's been running unpermitted drainage through common property, causing erosion and potential flooding. I've got photos, video, and financial logs showing they bypass city approval." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "That's a serious violation. Send me everything. I'll review it, but if it checks out, the city will want to inspect ASAP." I glanced toward the backyard where the pergola stood under the morning sun, flag lifting softly in the breeze. "Believe me, it checks out." After we hung up, I turned to Lena, who hovered in the doorway with a folded towel in her hands, her morning ritual of anxious pacing written all over her face. "They're going to look into it?" she asked. "Not just look," I said. "If they confirm what I found, the HOA could face fines, mandatory repairs, and liability for any damage." Patty wanted a fight. She's about to get it from the city itself. Lena set the towel down and exhaled, some tension leaving her shoulders. "I still can't believe Martin helped. I thought he'd stay scared forever. People like him just need to see someone else step up first," I said. "Fear's contagious. So is courage." By mid-morning, I had the full evidence package uploaded to the city's portal, time-stamped and verified. I included a formal statement of observation as a licensed engineer, careful to keep Martin's name out of it. My experience taught me the value of precision. One wrong step, and Patty could spin this as a neighborly feud instead of what it really was. HOA misconduct with legal consequences. When I hit submit, a subtle thrill ran through me. It wasn't the thrill of victory yet, but the sharp calm that comes when you know the next move is theirs, not yours. The rest of the day, I played the role Patty expected. I trimmed the lawn, waved at passing cars, and let her think her deadline for pergola removal was still ticking. She wanted to see a man sweating under pressure. Instead, She saw someone quietly tending his home, chimes singing in the breeze. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Received. Initial review confirms probable violations. Scheduling site inspection. Keep quiet until we move. I smiled. Checkmate in progress, I muttered. That night, Lena and I sat under the pergola, the wood still smelling faintly of rain. Feels different out here, she said softly, leaning her head on my shoulder. It is different, I said. For months, Patty's been the only one making moves. Now the board's under a microscope, and they don't even know it yet. I thought about Martin in his dimly lit living room, peeking through blinds, waiting for a sign that his quiet rebellion hadn't been for nothing. When the city showed up, the entire neighborhood would know the tide had turned. The wind picked up, and the flag rustled above us like a quiet affirmation. The plan was in motion. The next part wouldn't be quiet anymore. The dawn air was crisp when I stepped outside, with my camera bag slung over my shoulder. Today wasn't about confrontation. It was about finishing the preparation phase. Every piece of evidence had to be airtight before the city made its move. I started at the Greenbelt, crouching where the grass still bore the scars of last week's storm. The soil was soft under my boots, streaked with muddy rivulets that traced the illegal water flow like a map. I snapped wide shots first, then close-ups of the PVC pipe and the way the surrounding dirt had eroded. Each click of the camera felt like a nail tightening in Patty Wexler's coffin. Next, I moved along the fence line, where the Jeffersons' yard backed up to the common area. A faint water stain still crawled up their wooden slats. I knelt and ran my hand over it, rough and damp, even after a few dry days. The smell of wet earth and faint mildew drifted up. I captured photos from multiple angles, careful to include landmarks that tied the evidence to the HOA property. A low voice startled me. You're really going through with this, huh? I turned to see Martin Briggs leaning over his side fence, his windbreakers zipped to his chin. His eyes flicked toward the street like always. I am, I said, keeping my voice even. And when this is over, you won't have to live like a prisoner in your own home. He nodded slowly, then disappeared back inside. Even his brief appearance told me how much he was risking. Patty had ruled this street with fear for too long. I spent the rest of the morning documenting every drainage outlet and slope in the common area. The neighborhood felt different today, quieter, but not in the usual way. Curtains still twitched, and a few neighbors watched from porches, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air, like they could feel something shifting under the surface. Back in my home office, I uploaded the new photos to the evidence folder, pairing them with a written report. My engineer's stamp went on the document with a click, turning my observations into an official professional statement. City code enforcement didn't just need proof, they needed expert framing. By midday, the full evidence package was ready. Photos, video, diagrams, written observations, and the HOA's own maintenance logs from Martin, all neatly labeled and time-stamped. I backed up everything on a second encrypted drive and slid it into my desk drawer. Lena appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee. You've been at it for hours, she said. I leaned back in my chair and took the cup. Every hour now saves us weeks of grief later. Once the city acts, Patty can scream all she wants. It won't matter. Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. I can't wait to see her face. I glanced out the window toward the pergola. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, the flag rippling softly. For months, that site had felt like a target. Today, it felt like a fortress. Before dinner, I walked the property one more time, testing myself the way I used to before inspections overseas, methodical, precise, leaving nothing to chance. I checked the fence lines, the pergola's anchors, the slope of the soil. Everything was in order. Everything told the same story. Our home was solid, and the HOA was standing on rotten ground. When the sun finally sank and the chimes whispered through the evening air, I knew the prep work was done. The next step wasn't mine. It belonged to the city now. I stood under the pergola and whispered to the night, "It's your move, Patty." If you've ever wanted to see a bully corner themselves with their own mistakes, hit like and subscribe. The next part is where the trap I've built for Patty finally starts to snap shut, and you won't want to miss it. The morning air had that sharp stillness that always comes before something breaks. I stood at the end of my driveway, coffee in hand, watching the street like it was enemy territory. Patty's silver SUV rolled past slowly, her window sliding down just far enough for a smirk to flash across her face before she drove on. She thought the deadline for removing my pergola had passed. She thought today she'd win. But my trap was already set. Back inside, my phone buzzed with a text from James Fulton. Inspection scheduled. ETA 11 a.m. Stay calm. Let them see everything naturally. I exhaled, slowly. This was it. The moment months of quiet work had been building toward. I opened the evidence folder one last time, scrolling through photos, videos, diagrams, and Martin's logs. Everything was clean, organized, undeniable. Patty didn't know it yet, but the battlefield had already shifted under her feet. Around 10:30, I saw movement through the blinds. Patty was in my driveway again, flanked by Carl and another board member I didn't know by name. This time, she didn't bother with fake politeness. Final notice, she said, voice sharp. The pergola comes down today. We'll be filing the lien by this afternoon. I leaned casually against the garage frame. You might want to wait on that. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Some things have a way of changing fast, I said, letting the words hang without explaining. Her confidence faltered for the first time in weeks. At exactly 11:02, a white city vehicle turned the corner and pulled up to the curb. The decal on the door read, Municipal Code Enforcement. Two inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand, scanning the street before walking toward the greenbelt. Patty's voice went shrill. What are they doing here? I didn't answer. I just followed the inspectors as they made their way to the common area, where the ground still bore the marks of last week's storm. One knelt by the exposed PVC pipe, running a hand along the erosion. The other took photos and measurements, occasionally glancing at the slope toward the Jefferson's fence. Unpermitted drainage installation, the first inspector said flatly. We'll need to see HOA authorization and city permits. Patty stammered, we voted. Voting doesn't replace a permit, the inspector said, without looking up. He scribbled something on his clipboard and started photographing the trench line. Neighbors began to emerge from behind their blinds, drawn by the unusual scene. Mr. Hughes wandered out with his hands in his pockets. The Jeffersons peeked over their fence, and even Martin appeared on his porch, pale but watching. The quiet cul-de-sac felt like it was holding its breath. Patty's face flushed crimson. This is harassment. The second inspector turned to her. Ma'am, this is a city matter now. I suggest you gather any documentation you have, because this property is in violation. We'll be issuing a notice today. I didn't say a word. I just let the silence settle, the wind chimes from the pergola, carrying a soft metallic note across the yard. For the first time, Patty didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, jaw working, while her own board members shifted uncomfortably beside her. By the time the inspectors left, half the street had seen her unravel. The official notice was taped to the HOA clubhouse door by noon, bright orange against the beige siding. Stop work order, violation of city code. I stood under my father's pergola. That afternoon, the sun warming the wood beneath my hands. Months of harassment, threats, and intimidation had led to this. Patty cornered by her own arrogance, and the law now watching her every move. Tomorrow would bring the public fallout. But today, for the first time since coming home, I felt the neighborhood shift in my favor. By the time the HOA board meeting rolled around that evening, the entire neighborhood felt different. The orange violation notice on the clubhouse door glared like a warning beacon, and whispers floated through the cul-de-sac. For the first time in months, blinds weren't just twitching, they were open. People wanted to see what would happen to the woman who had ruled them through fear. Lena walked beside me toward the clubhouse, her hand gripping mine. You ready for this? She asked. More than ready, I said. My heart was steady, like I'd marched into this kind of battlefield before. Only this one smelled like fresh-cut grass instead of dust and diesel. Inside, the room was packed. Folding chairs filled the small space. Neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder. The air buzzed with quiet tension. At the front table sat Patty Wexler, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Carl beside her, flipping through papers he clearly didn't want to read. Patty's voice cracked like a whip as soon as we entered. Mr. Cole, you are out of order. This meeting is for the board and compliant residents only. I didn't move from the center of the aisle. Then I guess you'll need to explain this to compliant residents, I said, pointing toward the window where the city's bright orange notice glared from the door. A murmur rippled through the room. Mr. Hughes coughed into his hand to hide a grin. The Jeffersons exchanged looks of quiet satisfaction. Patty tried to recover, her voice rising. That notice is a mistake. The door opened behind me, and 2 city inspectors stepped in. The same ones from that morning. Their presence shifted the air instantly. Conversations died, chairs creaked as people leaned forward. Patricia Wexler, the lead inspector said, clipboard in hand. She stiffened. Yes. Per our investigation today, the drainage system installed on HOA common property is unpermitted and non-compliant with city code. This meeting is now subject to observation. Any actions you attempt to take against homeowners regarding alleged drainage violations will be noted as retaliatory. Gasps broke out. Patty's face flushed crimson, and for the first time, she stammered. You can't just... The inspector raised a hand. Ma'am, this is a formal notice. The HOA is required to cease all enforcement actions against Mr. and Mrs. Cole until the violations are corrected. Failure to comply may result in fines and legal action against the association. The room erupted into whispers, some of them gleeful, some shocked. I turned slowly, scanning the neighbors' faces. For months, they'd hidden behind curtains. Now, their eyes were bright with something I hadn't seen since coming home. Relief. Carl cleared his throat. Maybe we should postpone any liens, he muttered. Postpone? Mr. Hughes barked from the back row. You've been terrorizing us over flowers and mailboxes while you were breaking the law yourselves. The Jeffersons nodded vigorously. About time someone stood up to this nonsense. Patty's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her authority evaporated like mist under sunlight. I didn't gloat. I just stood a little taller, Lena's hand warm in mine. We all deserve to live in our homes without fear, I said to the room, voice steady. This isn't about bending to bullies. It's about fairness, about respect. Martin Briggs rose slowly from his seat along the wall. His voice shook, but he spoke anyway. I've been on this board for 6 years. I let myself be scared into silence, and I regret that. But after today, I vote to remove Patty as president, effective immediately. The room went still, then erupted in cheers and murmurs of agreement. Hands shot up. Even Carl hesitated, then raised his own. Patty's face went pale. For the first time, she looked small in that chair she'd ruled from for so long. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of months lift from my shoulders. The public reckoning had arrived, and the neighborhood had chosen a side. The wind outside rattled the clubhouse windows, carrying the faint echo of the pergola chimes. My father's presence felt close, like he'd been waiting for this moment as much as I had. The war Patty started in my driveway had just ended in front of the entire community, and she'd lost. The night after the board meeting, the neighborhood felt like a different place. Porch lights glowed, but this time they weren't hiding fear, they were beacons. People waved as Lena and I walked home from the clubhouse, voices carrying across the cul-de-sac in little bursts of conversation. I caught snippets. Finally, can you believe she... About time someone... It was like a spell had been broken. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee and a quiet sense of finality. The pergola stood steady in the backyard, flag lifting in the soft breeze, and the wind chimes sang their calm, metallic song. Across the street, Martin Briggs walked down his driveway with his head higher than I'd ever seen it. He gave me a nod that wasn't timid anymore. You did it, he called quietly, but there was pride in his voice. We did it, I answered. He chuckled and walked on, hands tucked in his pockets, no longer looking over his shoulder. Around noon, a city truck arrived to post the official follow-up notice on the clubhouse door. HOA under review. All enforcement suspended pending compliance. Patty Wexler's silver SUV was nowhere to be seen. Word was, she'd stepped down as president and submitted a letter claiming health reasons. I doubted anyone would see her at another board meeting again. By late afternoon, neighbors started drifting into the street, conversations blossoming in clusters. Mr. Hughes leaned on his rake and told me he was replanting his roses. The Jeffersons were already planning to repaint their garage the color they actually liked. One woman I barely knew stopped me just to say, "Thank you for giving us our street back." I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like a man who'd finally kept a promise to myself, to Lena, and to my father. That evening, Lena and I sat beneath the pergola. She rested her head on my shoulder, and the last light of day slanted through the beams, turning the wood golden. For the first time since I'd come home from deployment, the air felt free, unweighted by anxiety or waiting for the next knock on the door. "You know," she said softly, "I slept last night without checking the driveway once." I smiled. That's how it should be. The flag above us rustled as the wind shifted. I thought about my father, the quiet strength he had carried, the way he believed in protecting what mattered. I could almost hear his voice in the hum of the chimes. "You stood your ground, son." Across the street, Martin paused on his porch, watching the small crowd of neighbors laugh and talk. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind curtains or shadows. That, more than any city notice or resignation letter, felt like victory. I took a slow breath, letting the sound of the chimes settle into the moment. This fight hadn't been about fines or paperwork. It had been about reclaiming dignity, mine, Lena's, and the entire street's. I set my mug on the table beside me and spoke more to the evening than to anyone in particular. You can try to scare people into silence. You can push and threaten and hide behind rules. But eventually, the truth catches up. And when it does, there's no place left to hide. Lena squeezed my hand, and I felt the weight of months finally lift for good. If you've ever fought for your home, your family, or just the right to live in peace, you know how much this moment means. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you faced an HOA or neighbor like Patty, share your story. I read every single one, and this channel is where we remind each other that standing up for what's right is always worth it. The wind carried one last soft clang of the chimes as the sun dipped below the roofs, and I thought, not for the first time, that my father would have been proud.